Welcome to the Doctors of Running Virtual Roundtable, where we, a group of doctors of physical therapy, discuss the art and science of running and the stuff that we're putting on our feet. Today is episode number 87. We have myself, Nathan, trying to host this thing today, and then we also have Matt Klein, our founder, and Dr. David Salas as well. So three of the regulars here today. You're stuck with us, and we're really excited for what today is. Today, episode number 87, we are going to be talking about the current trends that we're seeing in the footwear industry with a focus on midsoles. So we'll briefly recap a couple of topics, one of those being foams, looking at the trends of what is happening with foams. We'll recap the conversations we had with Dr. Jeff Burns a few weeks ago. If you want to go back into those are episode number 83 and 84. We had a 2-hour conversation with him, and he just gave a really great lowdown of the history of foams and some things that he likes to look at when considering what they're for. Then we're also going to dive into things like geometry of shoes, stack heights, drops, rockers, and of course, plates, because a plate apparently is necessary for everything. I'm getting a little salty about all the plates, but we'll talk about that later. We'll also talk about who may benefit from what when it comes to these trends, which of these trends we think are going to stick, what we might see in the future that hasn't necessarily picked up a lot of steam yet, and what of this is more marketing smoke than anything else. So we're excited to talk about all of these topics. I personally have 11 different shoes around me to refer to, so hopefully we can give a good tangible connection to the topics we talk about with actual shoes that we have tested and that we've worn. So we're excited to dive into this topic. Before we go into that, we're going to as always, we're going to do our subjective question, and it's going to pertain to the midsole. And again, a midsole is all of the stuff that sits under your foot, that's between the connection with the ground and then where your foot sits on the platform. So when we talk about the midsole, obviously it's made up of something. Most of the time it's made up of foam. So what is the midsole foam that's currently your favorite? And do you prefer a plate to be in there or not, and why? So that's what we want to hear from you guys. But David and Matt, let's hear from you guys. What's your current favorite foam, just from like a purely you enjoy running in it standpoint or performing in it or whatever, not from any sort of scientific perspective? Crickets.
That's a loaded question.
Yes, it is.
If I had to go by consistency and what I enjoy running in and what I continue to reach for, like just races aside, whatever we're doing, I would probably have to put it between two different midsoles. And the two of those would be, I counted my shoes when you said that. I have 17 shoes around me right now.
Oh, you got me beat by a lot. You got 17?
I would probably go between Lightstrike Pro from Adidas, because the Adios Pro 2, the Takumi Sen, the Boston, the Primex, super fun shoe to run in, but my ankles are a little sore afterwards. But and Nitro Elite from Puma. So I've got the faster Nitro Elite, and then I forgot what they called this colorway. It was the one that they had a tribute Spectra, yeah, for the athletes.
Spectra,
yeah. So Nitro Elite, both PIBA based midsole. Well, we don't know Lightstrike Pro actually. They never actually disclosed that. But nitrogen infused PIBA for the Nitro Elite midsole.
PBAX.
PBAX apparently.
PBAX.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So
depending on the shoe, though, I think Deviate Nitro Elite's PIBA. Faster Nitro Elite is PBAX. Yeah,
correct.
I'd just like to point this out. We will cut this out and put this as a reel later that he did not choose the Alpha Fly. This is a big deal.
He didn't.
I did not choose ZoomX.
I didn't choose ZoomX. The Alpha Fly is actually
pretty sweet.
Yeah, the Alpha Fly is actually its own midsole at this point for David.
Well, because it's okay. Like the Vaporfly does not work for me very well. Like I've tried it. I've given this thing plenty of chances now at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And like it's a great workout shoe. I don't get injured in it, but I just I don't feel very comfortable in it.
Yeah.
And the Alpha Fly I do, and the Dragonfly I do, and I mean that's about it. But the Avanti TYO as well, also a great track spike. They're both the best track spikes I've ever worn. So, it's kind of just a matter of which one you want to wear on the day.
We all know that it's just foam. The only thing that matters is the foam.
Yep, that's
So,
it. Not the upper,
Matt,
not
what's
the
your-
geometry, nothing. It's just the
nothing,
foam.
just foam. Yeah.
You sure it's not the carbon plate?
Oh crap! I forgot about that.
Oh gosh. How
Okay,
could you
and
forget?
David, do you prefer a plate or no plate?
If I'm going fast, plate.
Okay.
Like
Cool.
a spike plate. Well, it depends actually. Like if I'm on the track and I like a lower profile shoe, like say the Adidas RC or the old Takumi Sen 7. I guess you could kind of say Takumi Sen 8 with like the plastic energy rods, you know?
Still
those-
plate-ish.
Plate-ish, but like they had the torsion system before. Like, did that count as a plate? Like, right?
Yeah.
Like
It gets murky.
It gets murky, but like I prefer like those lower profile shoes if I'm working out on the track, over something that's say like 35 millimeters plus, you know, with the soft foam and a plate and a rocker geometry.
So either a lower profile non-plated or a higher stack plated for you. Cool.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Matt, what do you got for your favorite midsole?
Right now. Mm-hmm. The thing that I keep reaching for are shoes with Power Run PB in them. So Saucony's foam. So I can't show the other one that I keep grabbing, but not necessarily for racing, but definitely like all my training runs. And this is me doing the opposite of David, where I've been grabbing the Exodus Ultra, which is supposed to be a rugged trail shoe, and running in road on it. It has actually done okay. Minus the lugs are now gone, so there's also that. But it's got a Power Run PB core, and it's not the fastest foam, but it just feels good. It's got just enough bounce in there that it feels good as a trainer. This has a rock plate, but again, no like stiffening agent. So it's been really pleasant. Not the shoes I would reach for racing at the moment. We'll have to see what they do with the Endorphin Pro 3. But Power Run PB has been really nice for training and workouts right now.
I love that he says the opposite of me, because I definitely just took the Mizuno Horizon through
Exactly
80% of my 10-mile trail run this morning.
Yeah. Whereas I will take the trail shoes through the road runs to see what happens. And then they don't last.
When you wear rugged trail shoes on roads, you know you didn't buy that pair of shoes.
Yes,
You know that was sent to you.
That was sent to me as I blow through the lugs. Go, well, there's no more traction there. That's
the
gone.
life of a shoe reviewer.
Like I need to get these
You're like,
miles.
I
in
don't need to
somehow.
worry about longevity here. No, it's great.
Nathan,
and
how
prefer
about
plate or no plate? Plate or no plate for you though?
For training, no plate, but for racing, plate.
Okay.
What about you? What's your favorite foam?
Yeah, I think I have two, and it's funny. All the shoes that end up being my favorites actually all have like dual density, so it's hard to parse out which foam I actually like the most. But it's one of them is what David said, and it's Light Strike Pro. So and combined with Light Strike, so like the Boston 10 was my favorite shoe last year, and I just love the combination of those two. That there's nothing super special about Light Strike, and I prefer that, and the Light Strike Pro on top is just that extra little bit that I really enjoy. And then the other, so that's definitely my first. I think the ones that fall underneath it are the regular Nitro Foam in the Velocity. Did I bring my Velocity? Yes, the Nitro Foam in the Velocity. I just think it kind of gets you a little bit of softness, a little bit of bouncy feeling, but it feels pretty traditional and stable for me. And then the other one is actually just regular Power Run from Saucony, just because I'm not afraid of what it's going to be. Yeah. It doesn't. I'm weird that I just like boring foams, I think, and that's okay.
You know what?
What?
Make that 18 shoes.
Oh dang! The Iconi goat.
The king
from Karhu.
The Karhu Iconi, the king of a boring but still very consistent and just nice training ride.
Yeah.
One of my favorite shoes.
So, I guess for me with the plate or no plate, by the way, despite the Boston 10 being my favorite shoe last year, I'm a preference towards no plate for most of the time. I did enjoy, like I raced my marathon in the Endorphin Pro 2, and that was great. And I do enjoy plates sparingly, but not for training. I'd rather run in other things like the Ride or what else do I got over here? Any of these shoes over here. Velocity 2. There's lots of them. So
Velocity 2
I'd rather
is
no
good.
plate. And even for like workouts, since I'm not as fast as like David is, I actually really enjoy having something that just flexes with me, and it's fine. It's fine. That's just preference.
We haven't had a lot
Okay.
of flexibility in shoes for a little bit, so it's interesting. We're starting to see a couple kind of come back here.
Yeah.
Anyway,
We'll definitely talk about that.
Isn't
later
that
on.
interesting? I mean, well, trends in midsoles, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get there. Let's save
sorry,
it. Let's save it.
My bad.
So I have another question for you. If you like answer this as quickly as you can, okay? That's my goal for both of you. Pick an apparel company that is the most comfortable. Go.
Rabbit.
Rabbit.
Yeah, Rabbit. I agree. So I feel like we joke about how soft Rabbit apparel is all the time. Are you wearing Rabbit right now, Matt?
Yeah, it's the Rabbit.
That's the
like,
high country one.
Yeah, I have multiple high countries that I use for both everything and work and patients. So I was like, that's really nice. Yeah, I know.
It's like a dress
I
shirt.
run in it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that you run in, and that's what it's
Yep.
made for.
Yep.
So the reason I bring that up is because this episode is sponsored by Running Warehouse, and they have a couple new lines of clothes that have just come on. So they have some from Patagonia and Vuori that are just coming on now, but the women's Rabbit Cali Vibes and Mother Runner collections, they just got those in. So at runningwarehouse.com, you can go check out those clothing lines. We all think that Rabbit is ridiculously comfortable, and I do think we're going to be testing some Vuori stuff soon, which should be fun. In addition to those things, they're having some other product launching in late May, including the Nike React Infinity 3, the Asics Cumulus, Saucony Axon 2, Freedom 5. So they've got a lot of stuff coming at the end of May. They have a couple other promotions coming up soon. In mid-May, starting on the 15th, they're going to have a Brooks bra sale. And it'll be 35% off all bras for that, which is awesome. It's a big sale, or big, whatever, markdown. And then they're also having a Memorial Day promotion, and you can check in the last week of May. There's going to be lots of stuff that's going to have markdowns on them in late May. So you can check that out for Memorial Day promotions. So Running Warehouse, one thing, as we always say this, that we love about them is their 90-day return policy. And as people who think you should find the shoes that work for you, they kind of embody that by allowing people to actually try them out. As long as you don't abuse it, they really respect the runner. And I wore a shoe for 45 miles, and I messaged them and said, hey, it wasn't working for me. And they let me send it back. So that's a really good thing. So runningwarehouse.com, you can check it out for all their new stuff that they've got coming in May. Should be awesome.
Yep.
And here we go. Oh, what do you got, David?
Another just super quick shout out. You mentioned Patagonia. The Patagonia Capilene material, the base layer material, really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a short sleeve. I have 2 long sleeves, running them all the time. Another solid
That's awesome.
option, which I got from Running Warehouse, personal purchase years ago, and they're still holding up.
Yeah.
So
Nice. That's the thing. It's hard for me to pull a trigger on expensive running gear. Like,
well, and
it just is, but then it does last forever.
yeah, and like the reason why I got it was because it could double as lifestyle. Like the design of the shirt itself was something I could wear outside of running, so I could do both.
Yeah.
So I kind of
That's
pick
good.
and choose.
Cool. Awesome. Well, we're going to jump into our main segment, which is about these current trends in midsoles and in the running industry. And the 5 topics that we have lined up to really talk about are foams, geometry, stack height, drop, and plates. So we'll hit those 5, and then we're going to talk about some future concepts that we might be seeing or that we expect to be coming. But Matt, do you want to give us a quick rundown? We're not going to spend too much time on foams because, again, I'm going to refer you back to our episode 83 and 84 with Dr. Jeff Burns. But for people who haven't heard that yet, what kind of trends are we seeing in foams right now in terms of the compounds and what they're made of?
I think one of the biggest things that was surprising to me, this is a slight tangent, but still on topic, was Jeff was talking about how when companies say, oh, this is a TPE-based foam, that technically, like, all these foams are TPE. So this is why we're kind of going through this, and the purpose of this is not to, poo-poo anyone or talk down to them. It's just kind of to be educational about going, hey, this is something we learned too. So all these foams are technically TPE, but they are vastly different despite these, like, it would just with these small changes. So the things we are seeing is that, durability wise, some of these newer foams are lasting a long period of time. So the PBA, PBAC, stuff like that. We still don't know what everything is because research always takes a little bit to catch up. But durability wise, things are working better. Human beings tend to gravitate towards softer foams. They tend to like them better, on not everyone, but a lot of people. So I think we're starting to see these not just be racing footwear. It's starting to come into the training footwear and some of those areas. And yeah, they are improving economy. The differences in economy are, night and day between some of the older stuff, the EVA, some of the more traditional midsole foams, and some of the newer ones. And so it's things that we need to pay attention to and acknowledge, going, yes, these are different. They have different impacts on the human body. How specifically they are affecting the human body, we are still working on. So there's a lot more to be found there. Anything you two would add?
I think Jeff did a great job kind of laying out the history of foams. Yeah. And I do think one of the things we're seeing right now is the attempt to take things from EVA to something a step improved.
Further.
Jeff talked about two main components of how to measure like what a foam is doing, firmness and energy return or resilience. And he was just saying how those are improved in other types of foams, like PBA-based foams, for sure. And then even these supercritical foams is I think that's a whole other trend that we're seeing.
Right.
Instead of just EVA, they're supercritical EVA, which, again, we're going to refer you back to his episode. But I think that's an interesting trend, partially because they do feel different. Like when you go and get a shoe from Kohl's or from Walmart or whatever, you're going to get an EVA shoe, and that's what people are used to. So even when I first put on a Skechers shoe for the first time with Hyperburst in it, I remembered that just feeling different. And I do think there's something to be considered when it comes to different feeling foams and what that means for a new runner. And I want to hear y'all's thoughts on, in Jeff's episode, I think an easy conclusion to make is you shouldn't get a shoe that's not PBAX or PBA because it has the best properties. Why would you say that may or may not be, like, is that actually a true conclusion that we should draw from that episode? Or what might be some other considerations, knowing that all these training shoes, like the Exodus, you just pulled out that trail shoe with the Power Run PB in it. Yep. We're seeing it come into training shoes. We're seeing supercritical foams. We're seeing PBA in training. Should we draw that conclusion that it's just better to get a PBAX shoe or PBA shoe?
I think there's the scientific answer, and I think there's the practical answer.
Yeah.
So let's say you take a look at resilience. You look at how the foam holds up. You look at the energy return you get back from it, metabolic efficiency, all of those things. Let's say it does go in the positive direction. But if that shoe doesn't feel good for you, you're not going to wear it. And there's plenty of people. I had someone in the clinic earlier this week, and they were wearing the Brooks Ghosts, whatever the newest model is on that. And they're getting ready for a marathon coming up, Mountains to Beach over in Ventura. And they asked me about, like, hey, should I switch shoes? And I'm like, you've been training in this shoe? This is working for you? Like, you had a small little hiccup, which is why they came in, but they're good now. Like, just stick with that shoe. Like, that's the shoe that you like. That's the shoe that you're running with. I would be doing you a disservice to say, change it all up right now. You know? And that's a non-PBAX shoe. So I think it depends on the comfort of the individual, what they're used to wearing. And with anything, you got to break it in. You got to try it out. You got to make sure it works for you. You see a lot of fast times running the Vaporfly Next Percent too. And I just said earlier in the episode, that shoe doesn't really work for me. And it's not going to work for everyone. So
I think it's huge. Matt, do you have anything to add there?
I think David hit it right on the head, especially when one of the things that I get most concerned about with the patients that I work with is changes too fast. And we know that no matter how, and again, one of the things going back to your comments is going, these foams are seeming to be better. Well, how do we define better? Yes, they are more resilient. They're lasting longer. There's more, they're improving economy, all that kind of stuff. But the question is, do you need that for each person? This is one component of the shoe, and this is why we talk about other things like geometry, uppers, all those kinds of things. So especially for people that are used to a certain shoe, an EVA-based shoe, if you're interested in something like this, if it might be something you could try, but please don't just jump straight into it. Know that it's going to take time for your body to get used to this, because you're only factoring the shoe. You're not factoring in how your body's going to respond to that, and we're still trying to figure that out. And we have zero evidence on injury risks and relationships to these new foams. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just saying be careful when we say better, because they feel great, all this kind of stuff, and a lot of them, but we don't know how that's going to work for everybody. So we need a little bit more evidence. I wouldn't throw out EVA. Yes, some of these shoes are really fun, and I totally admit that, but there are some days where I don't want something that's more bouncy. We talk about shoes as tools. Certain tools are going to work really well in certain places and not so well in others. So I wouldn't throw it out, because it depends.
Yep. No, I agree with y'all. That's good. I did want to... the reason I wanted to bring it up is because I think you could leave that episode thinking, I need to get a P-Vax PIBA shoe for all of my running all the time. Whereas I think when you really talk about some of the properties he was mentioning, it really, when it comes to a racing shoe for someone who wants to reap the maximal benefit from a running economy perspective, which again is individualized as well. But we do know that those shoes with those components will perform better. We've said that forever about like the Carbon X isn't necessarily isn't a super shoe because of the foam component, and the foam's important in that category. But when it comes to daily training, you don't necessarily need that much resilience. Resilience meaning the instantaneous, not longevity, not durability. Obviously, we'd rather have a durable shoe because it's better for us, but the resilience meaning it reforms every single time compared to what it compresses. So that's part of why I think I personally really like a lot of these shoes that have the dual density stacking, which I think is another foam trend we're seeing right now. Dual density was always in the past used in a stability way where it was always a dual density post, and that was the conversation. Whereas now, like I lifted up before, but the Boston 10 has dual density, softer foam on top, firmer foam on bottom. You see it again in a shoe like the Puma Velocity 2, where you have the softer foam on top, firmer foam on bottom. You see it again in the 880, where you have two different, fresh foam components. You have so many shoes with this dual density as a way to get your foot on a potentially softer platform without it being super wobbly. So I do think that's another trend. Oh, here, Tecton X. You have it again. They're everywhere. So I think that's an interesting trend as well, to see dual density used from a stacking perspective instead of a stability perspective or pronation control perspective.
And this might be getting into our next topic in terms of looking at a little bit of like internal geometry, but that's, I think, one of the reasons why I like the Exodus Ultra so much is it's actually got Power Run PB and Power Run. So there's a Power Run PB core, and then the rim or the surrounding the rest of the shoe is Power Run. So it ends up making this really stable ride for somebody like me that's not overly aggressive, but the dual use of these foams allows for some very interesting stuff to happen inside or around the shoe that I don't think was really maximized beforehand. I think we're starting to see companies dip into that a little bit. What the exact outcomes are going to be, remain to be seen, because there's a lot of them that need to come out that we've been able to see and test. But it is cool to see people messing with not just going, oh, let's kick the EVA out, but going, how can we mesh these together, and what happens when you start doing that? We don't totally know yet, but that's cool to see companies doing that.
Yeah, there's another shoe. I can't talk about it, but from a company, I love that shoe and did the exact same thing. So where it's got a P-Bax core, EVA rim,
It's good stuff. I think the other trend, what would you guys say? Is the trend of foams going towards firmer foams or towards softer foams?
Oh, way softer.
This is such a stupid question.
That's leading question there, yeah.
Yeah, definitely leading the witness here.
Yeah.
But when you think about soft foams, is that your colorway of the Prime X?
Yes, he got the special one.
Oh, we're in April now. I could talk about it. Yes.
It's not Running Warehouse. You're fine.
Yes,
that's a sweet color.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I couldn't talk about this for a while. We're good. I didn't blow it. Sweet.
It's a great color. It's like
it's an awesome color. Yeah.
Almost like citrus shoe.
Yeah.
It looks really sweet.
These
foams are getting really soft. Another episode to think about going back, and I don't know the number, but Dr. Malzo, we got to interview him, and he talked about the firmness of a shoe and how that correlates with injury. So we talk about cushioning in that episode quite a bit. So we won't dive into it much right here, but go back, check that out. We do talk, it's episode number 79. We'll go back and check that out, and you can hear Matt and Dr. Malisu talk about what cushioning and injury and how those go together, because that's what some of his research is focused in. We tend to, there's a spectrum of soft to firm. We all experience it differently, i.e. Bondi X between David and I. I think it's super soft. He thinks it's super firm. But when there's a spectrum, but things are getting softer, and there is consequences of that, good or bad. So go back to that episode. You'll get to hear a lot more about it. Let's go into topic 2, and that's talking about geometry. And so, Matt, do you want to tell us what we mean when we think about when I say geometry? What does that mean? And then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so when we say geometry, we're talking about the shaping of the sole. The most common trend that people will notice in today's footwear stuff is that the stack heights are getting much taller, so you're getting more maximal stack height shoes. You're getting shoes that have far more bevels and toe springs, so they're very rockered. There's some stuff going on internally that also is slowly happening, like I mentioned earlier. But then there's also things like midsole or outsole flare, right? So stuff coming at Nathan had a much better example with the Ride 15 there with outsole flare. Although Saucony's been doing that for a lot of companies have been using flare for a little bit. It's just gotten way more significant as they've looked for ways to stabilize these extremely high stack height shoes. So shoes don't look like they used to. They are in different shapes. Again, as Nathan mentioned, the geometries are different. They're trying different things and going, how can we work on efficiency, roll, all that kind of stuff. You're seeing differences in flexibility, which is a really big thing, where a lot of shoes are just, this tall mids are super stiff, or they're putting plates and everything. You're starting to see a small kind of what's the term I'm looking for? Things are kind of coming back a little bit with the slow introduction.
The pendulum is coming back.
The pendulum's coming back a little bit with a couple with max stack height shoes or higher stack height that have a little bit more flexibility. So but it's still kind of on that more higher stack, stiffer direction at the moment. So a lot of these geometries are changing. Right. We know that a lot of them can make impacts on certain tissues in the human body and change where load is, but it's happening a lot.
Yeah, and you mentioned rockers. Sorry I'm referencing so many episodes, but we have a full episode on rocker soles and how they influence the body. That's episode number 75. So if you want to talk about that, go back. But I do think you also mentioned sole flare, and we're seeing a lot of sole flare, and it's used in a lot of different ways. Like you said, I have the Ride up here, so they flare the forefoot out really wide. So there's a good half-inch to an inch wider than the actual foot platform that the midsole goes out, and it creates this really wide base. I would say the pioneer of that was Hoka. They came out and they gave you this huge platform that was really high and really wide, and then they put a rocker on it too. But I think that wide, full contact outsole and the flaring of a shoe, I think was really pioneered by Hoka, and they really started doing that. What do you guys think about different flares, where they sit, who they may or may not work for? Like, you see flaring in the forefoot quite a bit. You also see flaring in the rear foot, both posteriorly and to the side. When does that become problematic for certain people? When is it a good thing?
So you have to realize that flaring can both improve the stability of a shoe because it extends out beyond the foot, so it's going to inherently resist motion in that direction. If you land there, though, you have to recognize your landing is you're going to hit the ground earlier than if the shoe wasn't flared, right? So for a lateral heel flare, a posterior lateral heel or lateral heel flare, a lot of people will come in an inverted position, meaning the sole of their foot is facing inward. Okay. When you land with a shoe that has lateral flare, you're going to hit the ground early. There's nothing you can really do about that. And then also the arc of motion that you have to transition to go through, it becomes larger, and in some cases that may actually accelerate because you have to go through a longer distance in the same amount of time. That becomes much greater speed. So it can cause early initial contacts in some people, while it can resist motion in others. It just depends on where your foot is landing. If you're somebody that comes in really hard with an inverted foot position, lateral flare may not be good for you. If you're somebody that rolls inward too much, you need a lot of extra control. Medial sole flare might be good. The same thing in the forefoot. A lot of people with that flare here, if the flare is too lateral here, a lot of those forefoot strikers tend to get pivoted in really quick. So it can be, but it also can be beneficial to guide you further inward if you need that. So the answer is it depends. It just depends on the mechanics, if you want motion there or not.
I think an example of the forefoot flare, lateral flare in the forefoot, that's probably the most prominent, is seen in New Balance, like the Rebel.
Yeah.
That shoe, and even their RC Elite. I haven't ran in it, but I don't know if you guys can confirm that. But they have a big lateral extension in the forefoot, so that's a good example there. I think heel flare, we're seeing it a lot in a lot of different shoes. Matt was holding up the Reebok Floatrate Energy 4 that has a wide base in the heel, and I had one other one in my head. Go ahead.
I feel like Newton does a pretty good job of that as well, up in the forefoot specifically.
Yes, forefoot width for sure.
Yeah, not in the heel, but in the forefoot. Yeah.
A comment on the New Balance, the Fuel Cell RC Elite 1. The version 2, they kind of did away with it a little bit, but the RC Elite 1 had this massive lateral sole flare, which worked for a lot of people that tended to supinate too much and roll off the lateral aspect of their forefoot, which those bones in that lateral region are not nearly as durable as some of the medial ones. So oftentimes, if you have
Tell me about it.
Sorry, Nathan. If you want to get motion directed more toward the medial side off the big toe, which is a much larger joint, you also have additional bones on the underside called sesamoids bone there where you pivot off of. That was a great shoe. So I had a lot of older Masters runners with really stiff calves that loved that shoe because it was higher drop and it got them to get off the first ray better instead of pivoting off the lateral aspect. But we'll have to see what they do with version 3. We're seeing some photos, but the Rebel is the next one that has that lateral flare for anybody that needs that, going, hey, I want to be able to potentially get my direction of force a little bit more medial at the forefoot.
Yeah. The other flare we didn't talk about, and it's thankfully because it's a trend away from something for the most part, is posterior heel flare. So posterior heel flare is to the back. A lot of the times that you see it, it's when we've talked about this a lot, so we won't belabor it too much, but I don't have a good shoe for posterior heel flare. But it's when the
good.
sole
I'm glad.
backwards.
That means they're getting rid of it. This is good.
I think
the most iconic one. The most iconic one would be the 10-9 from Hoka, because they gave it this huge extension on the heel, and the goal was to increase time of compression of the foam as you're running downhill to decrease some of the impact forces. Sure. But what happens when you do that is if you have a really big posterior flare, you're going to have an increased moment arm or lever around your ankle, which is going to throw it forward really quick. So you have early contact, which means that your muscles haven't had the time to prepare to land on the ground. Believe it or not, like before you pick up a can or a cup to drink from, or you're going to squat or whatever, your muscles turn on before you start the movement. Like your brain is preparing these muscles to fire. The same happens when we run, and if your body is landing before you're ready for it, you have delayed activation of these muscles, which gives you less eccentric control as you're absorbing shock as you're landing. So posterior heel flare has, we would argue, for the most part, a negative consequence for most people. The Clifton Edge is another one that's more popular than the 10-9 that has a very big heel flare. And some people do fine with it. Like, it's not just because something increases load doesn't mean it's automatically awful. But for the majority of people, it's probably not the right choice, especially for heel strikers. And if it's a forefoot striker, then it doesn't matter what's going on in the back.
For that person, it doesn't matter.
But a good trend within the posterior heel flare reality is heel bevels. And I think, the Ride 15, I'm holding it up a lot because I think it actually fits a lot of these trends that we're talking about, because they took it and they, here they put a really nice heel bevel on this shoe, and you don't have there's an extended foam behind the shoe, but the apex is down underneath the foot, so you don't have any impact from what the foam that's behind. Kind of like what you see in the Vaporfly too. There's like an extension of the foam, but it's all beveled, so it doesn't matter. It's out of the way. So bevels in the heel are another trend when it comes to geometry, I would say. So,
and I would say that's good because inherently the heel, the calcaneus bone, is rounded, right? That's something called the heel rocker, which during walking gait or running, when we were barefoot, is supposed to improve efficiency with your forward transition. So having a posterior heel flare would go exactly against that, which I can understand Hoko trying to argue some of the force changes, but you're also ignoring some of the other like biomechanical things that happen that can actually increase stress in certain areas. So I would always suggest, and people who have read the website know that I say this a billion times, that bevel, right, tends to improve that forward transition. Now, there are some populations we're not going to talk about here that when it comes to walking or non-running populations, that might be a different story. But for running, especially for heel strikers, forefoot strikers, it's not going to matter, but heel strikers, it just really improves that forward transition. And I'm glad to see a lot of the posterior flare leaving and hopefully dying.
Two more, or at least two more, a couple more geometry trends that I see, and I want to hear if you guys think it's legit or marketing smokescreen. One of them is, I don't have the perfect shoe for it, but one is the dovetail heels. So like where they have an extended heel and they have a dovetail in it. Think about like the Carbon X3 might be a good one, or there's the Bondi X. Kinvara has it. So you're seeing these shoes with an slightly extended heel, not really. Again, it's beveled, but then it's got
just out of reach.
Oh man! But it's just got an indent in the back that makes it look like 2 points in the back of the shoe. Do you think there's anything to that? What could it do? Why does it exist? That kind of thing.
I mean, this is a point when I think theory meets practice, and there's not really a good answer for it. I know anecdotally, people speaking just from theory like to believe that there is a decoupling between the different sides of the foam and that it allows you to move a little bit more naturally, and then you can create essentially a midline groove down the middle of the shoe. Because most of these shoes, it's not just the heel, it continues forward quite a bit. I wanted to grab my On Cloud Monster, and I forgot to grab that.
I got you.
But you got it? All right, perfect.
Yep.
So that's a good example right there. So you have a good dovetail, real deep groove through the midline of that shoe. And it basically, like, On does a pretty good job of following it through almost the full shoe. But basically decouples that landing and allows you to move a little bit more naturally. That's the idea behind it. Whether or not that actually happens, I think there just needs to be more data on that. Yeah.
Now, David, I'm curious because we're hearing that term more frequently. You and I heard that from some great individuals we got to talk to recently. What does decoupling mean? Can we define that for the listeners and viewers?
Of course, yeah. I mean, this is obviously not something that's peer reviewed and published, right? But decoupling essentially is two pieces of material, in this case foam, in a midsole, that do not touch each other. And so you have a full single unit, which is the shoe, and there are two individual parts of this shoe that do not meet with each other. And that would be essentially a decoupling. So whether or not
they can function independently.
Right. So it could be in the frontal plane where you have like the medial and lateral aspect of the shoe, such as On or the Saucony. The Saucony Kinvara is still one piece, but a lot of these shoes, they'll split it. And you'll see this medial and lateral disposition. But with the Puma Faster Nitro Elite, which you held up right now, it's in the sagittal plane. So it's basically sagittal being like forward to back here. If you split yourself down the middle going forwards, it's right there. So it's basically going through this way where the decoupling is. And I think another shoe that did that was actually the Alpha Fly to some degree as well. You have the exposed plate that comes through, and you have that basically hoof 4-foot outsole. And then you have a lot of ZoomX. It's kind of decoupled, it's kind of not, because you do have the ZoomX above. But a lot of these are hybrids anyways. But essentially a decoupling is exactly what it sounds like, is that there's a moment in the shoe where the contact does not exist anymore.
Right. You referenced it, but what would you guys say? Another trend that we see are guidance lines. They're basically extensions of the dovetail, but a lot of them don't even have dovetails. It's just an opening and grooves that run longitudinally, kind of assisting with the decoupling, is the idea. What do you guys make of guidance lines? How much stock should you put in a guidance line? And what makes one guidance line maybe more potentially helpful than another? Helpful, that's maybe not the right word. More impactful than another that actually will do what you'd think it does.
I feel like I got to admit that I don't know if there's any peer-reviewed evidence on guidelines, and yet I feel like I hype them up in a lot of the shoes that we've had come through. Like, oh yeah, it's making this, helping guide me forward. I as I kind of reflect on this, going, is it? It's this component that could be facilitating forward momentum. Because your body's going to take the path of least resistance. So if there's less foam there, your body's going to go that direction versus an area where there's more foam. So I think it's theoretical. I think it feels like it should work. Whether it actually does is a really good question, and I personally don't know the answer. I'm curious if I've missed some literature out there on that, but that'd be interesting. Do you two
if
know?
You've seen it, send it.
Yeah, if I
not that I know.
I think not on grooves specifically, but we talked about it with Matt the other week about preferred pathway of movement, essentially.
Right.
There was a specific term he coined with it. What was it? Preferred movement guideline?
Yeah.
No.
He's
pathway?
referring to
preferred movement pathway.
That's referring to Ben O'Nigg's concept about each person has a preferred movement pathway that their body prefers to go through. I don't know if that was necessarily referencing.
Right.
Was he talking about guidance lines? Did I miss that?
To some degree, like with guide rails and things like that. Like,
yeah.
As a secondary concept, not as like the driving force of a shoe, but it kind of alludes to that in some degrees where you want the foot to follow a certain direction. And so that's why these companies are starting to integrate those types of features that much more.
Right. You want a shoe that will facilitate what the person already wants to do.
Right.
The idea of a guidance line would be maybe this helps facilitate through least resistance to get you in the direction you want to go. I think when I think of ones that actually do something, it's the deeper it is, the more impactful it might be.
Right.
And the wider it is, the more impactful it might be.
Right.
The Rincon 3 had a pretty wide groove. I think this is the Ride 15. It's got a pretty wide heel. It actually feels very similar to the Rincon 3 for me. And then it gets a little bit more shallow through the forefoot, so I don't think it does as much up there. But in the heel, you can kind of feel where the shoe, you kind of fall into the middle and the outsides kind of splay out to the side. On has probably the biggest guidance line because they don't even connect their cloud pods or cloud foam pods, whatever it's called. So, and then you have shoes like, the 880 that don't have any, they're just, they have an open area crash pad that you can land on, but they don't have any sort of guidance line forward. And that's not necessarily bad. It's just what it is. I use a crash pad for you, David. I said that for you.
I was waiting for somebody to say that with the dovetail, but crash pad comment.
Yeah.
Don't worry, I felt it. I didn't need to say anything.
I just think that when it comes to guidance lines, there might be something to them, but I don't think it's a major component. It's not like a guidance line will make this a shoe that is inherently stable. I think it's a component that you can consider, and if you can feel it, like there are some shoes like the Rincon 3 and the Guide 15 that I've been able to feel it when I'm moving through. So it's just interesting. Final thing on geometry, we're seeing cutouts be pretty common, both in racing shoes and mostly in racing shoes. Cutouts are pretty common. Both cutouts that you can see in the outsole, but also, Matt, you're holding up the Adios Pro 2, and I think that there's an interesting thing with that shoe on the lateral side where they cut out kind of like a slice from the outside, and then it's kind of got this little like shelf in the middle of the midsole. And so what do you guys think about cutouts? What are some considerations for different types of cutouts, and are they worth it, and what do they do?
I think the biggest reason for a cutout for most of these companies is weight. Can you cut down weight without sacrificing the transitions? And you see something like the Takumi Sen, I think, is an excellent example, because you look at the distal part of that lateral forefoot.
It's hilarious.
You're not really going to be coming off of that, right? Like if you're running a 5K, 10K and you're truly going all out and you're pushing from start to finish, you're going to resupinate, yes, but you're not going to really come off of that side unless you're really gassed and you're going to some pretty excessive extremes to keep running. But there are certain areas where you can actually take some of the components out of the shoe to lose weight. Mm-hmm. And I think some of that was also seen in the Audios Pro 2 on the medial side through the midfoot going into the forefoot, which was a really interesting cutout because in theory, if you're following the path of least resistance, you're going to crash onto that region. I apologize. I ran in sand in this shoe. That's what all that is.
This is, by the way, this is a perfect shoe for all-terrain use, according to David. Just let the...
Any shoe is for David.
Any shoe. I would die if I took that. If I took that shoe on sand. I think my ankles would just immediately explode. Just make one step, like yep, boom. Anyway, sorry, David.
I had to put that disclaimer out there before someone's like, "Why is there so much dirt on that?"
Because he used it as a trail shoe. That's why.
This one I haven't taken on trail, but I have taken it on sand.
Okay. Yes.
What was your point, though? What were we talking about?
The cutout.
Cutouts.
Yeah.
Right there. They have a pretty massive cutout right here. But I think with this shoe, they widen that forefoot out, and they basically crash you onto that great toe, and then they have that continental like little outsole there to like really get you onto it, grip, and pull. So it feels purposeful. And it doesn't feel excessive when you run in the Audios Pro 2. At least when you're running fast. When you're running slow, it kind of feels a little wonky. But it feels intentful.
To jump back on the other side, the lateral aspect, and Nathan brings up a really good point, because most people talk about the medial aspect, and we're seeing in the Audios Pro 3, looks like they are now going to cut out that same part in the Takumi Sen. And I totally agree with David where... I think they stabilize this well enough with the rods that this doesn't really become very apparent. And I think I've talked before about how they really just especially if you land the lateral, on the heel and the lateral aspect, it really drives you laterally. And I think with this sculpting, and I don't know if everybody can see this for the people listening. I'm holding the Audios Pro and pointing at the lateral cutout they have there. And I think, again, if there's less midsole there, you're likely going to go that way because that area is going to compress more, versus... So, but for whatever reason, I think that the setup in the heel prevents you from really pivoting over, and the stiffness in the rods really prevents you from pivoting over the medial aspect. Whereas I think the way the heel is set up, it's already driving you there, so then it drives you even more. So to answer your question, Nathan, I think with some of these cutouts, you may or may not be able to either save weight, or if you set it up right, may kind of guide motion a little bit because something may collapse more than the other. But again, just because there's a cutout there doesn't mean it's going to collapse, because if there's other things setting it up, plates, what have you, other geometrical aspects, then it might change. But that's a really good question because I haven't thought a lot about this. But this, I think, would probably contribute to why this shoe tends to keep you really lateral. So somebody like me, it works well. Somebody who already is either neutral or is going this way anyway, I've had people come and be like, this is not the shoe for me. And I haven't suggested it for them, but they'll message us going, why is this happening? Well, maybe.
Right.
And there was a recent Adidas signee that like basically pulled her contract to not run in that shoe. And like, there's plenty of people that are running in that shoe and love it, but it just didn't work for her. So,
yep, super interesting.
It does happen.
I do think that those cutouts are very impactful. I think that on the reverse side, there's other shoes like the original Glide Ride, like the Rebel 2, that don't have cutouts inwards, but have build out of geometry to the outside, like ribs. I've been calling them ribs or ridges. And those ridges, when you put more foam in an area, it's harder, just on the opposite way of decoupling, where it's easier for it to move independently. Adding more foam somewhere, even if it's not touching the ground, makes it harder for that area to compress because there's all those cross-linkage things going on between those fibers of the foam. And so even though the Rebel 2 is super soft, they have this rib on the medial side, and it keeps you from moving. Like for me, it felt like it pushed me even outside a little bit. through the heel, and that, I mean, I kind of run that way anyway, which is why I had my bone stress injury that I had. But that aside, I do think that ribbing and kind of having these convex components of midsoles has an impact. The original Glide Ride had a big medial kind of build out that kind of had that again. It pushed you a little bit more towards the outside, and it also had a convex area in that cutout on the lateral side. So I think that's interesting.
I got to give Nathan a quick shout out that when we were watching, so whenever this episode debuts a couple weeks ago, Nathan and I finally got to see each other for the first time in a long time. And our first thing to do together was, hey, let's go run like 14 miles for Nathan, which is like, when's the last time you had done that?
Man, my
like
marathon
months.
in October, probably.
Yeah.
Genuinely, because I was taking easy like 30-mile weeks for a long time after that. But
yep. And then you ease back into it, and then all of a sudden, hey, you were able, with everything you'd prepped your body with, because this was a long build up to be able to tolerate this. Did fine, right? Unless there's something new I didn't hear about.
I feel better now. I feel better now after that. It's the dumb, like, I had pain and then I ran 14 with you and then I felt better.
Yeah,
it's weird.
It's all a little
maybe it's like teaching your body what it needs. But what do you got? Anyway. Bring us back, DJ.
Thanks.
What do you got?
Yeah, random question. A little bit of a hot take, and also just your own personal opinion on this. We'll answer it real quick and we'll move on. How much of these cutouts is marketing? How much of this is showpiecing what is in the shoe?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a great question.
I think it's definitely a big part, and I think Adidas does an amazing job at it. When you do your cutout in a way that you see the 3-stripe through the rods, that's like they're giving you their logo through their stiffening agent in the shoe, right, which is crazy cool. So, I mean, I think a lot of it, like Boston 10 is not a light shoe. They didn't need to do a cutout in the bottom of the Boston 10 to make it lighter. No, they wanted to show the rods. And then the nice side effect is you get a little bit of weight shaved off of this heavier shoe. But I think that there are some functions of it, but I think a lot of it is more marketing. Obviously, something like, the Fast R, they didn't do this weird looking cutout. Sorry, no offense to Puma, but I mean, the cutouts are getting crazy.
Yeah,
they didn't do this to make it look good, but it does give you the visualization of their plate, which is cool, and it decouples. So you kind of get. I think it's a combination of things. There's also been after the Boston Marathon, people were showcasing stuff, and Puma showed another 5K, 10K racer that they're coming out with. We can't even really talk much about their 4-foot cutout. That's not like it doesn't bevel forward like a toe spring or anything like that. It goes opposite direction. And so maybe someday we will get to talk about that one. We've been able to test shoe, but it'll be good to talk about. Oh yeah.
Bondi That's X a great in one. The shape of an X.
Yes. 100%.
Like a lot of these cutouts and designs, I mean, even like the RC Elite 2, like you see that deep groove, but it goes all the way to the plate. You see the carbon fiber. Like it gives you that aesthetic piece where you can look at it and be like, yeah, like this
Pacer
is what's in my
SC,
shoe.
Same thing.
Yeah. You got to be able to see the plate to know it's there, right? So there is marketing component.
That goes back to our conversation with Stuart Jenkins from Blue Maca. He talked about the air as a component of a midsole, and until they made the air visible, no one bought it. Like no one would make the shoe, but once they made it visible, then people bought the shoe. So marketing is definitely a component. That's a good hot take question right there. We should move forward because we're gonna. A couple of these will be a little shorter. I say that, but we love to talk.
No, it's not.
That's. There's a lot on geometry, but we had to stick there for a while because there are so many different parts of shaping of shoes, and we didn't even hit everything. So feel free to shoot us questions, and maybe we can revisit this topic again later. Topic 3 is stack height. What kind of trends are we seeing with stack height, and what do we think?
Well, I think the biggest one.
I think it's. Good. You're good. Go for it.
Sweet. All right.
Yeah.
The biggest one is what I mentioned earlier, is that obviously stack heights are getting larger. You're not seeing too many shoes that are coming back that direction. You're getting a couple 5K, 10K racing shoes, and Kinvara doesn't count because it's always been relatively a similar stack height. I think they modified it a little bit, but you are seeing larger and larger stack heights, which allows people to add more and more cushioning, which influences the geometry because the more stack height you have, the mechanics of the shoe change, and you need to have things like rockers frequently or deeper flex grooves. But yeah, we're just continuing to see higher and higher stack heights. I mean, to the point, with the Primax where they're violating rules intentionally about the how high they can do it legally for racing. Adidas is like, we're going to make one illegal and get one of our athletes DQ'd from a win. But, it's things are still getting higher and higher and higher.
So we obviously had the minimalist movement.
Right.
Now we're clearly in what you could call a maximalist movement. Is maximalist movement here to stay? Will pendulum swing back? Why or why not? What do you guys think?
I think it'll come back, but I think it's here to stay though. That lane will always be there. Even with the minimalist movement, when shoes like the Vibram 5 Fingers or even like the New Balance Pure series or different kinds of shoes that were coming out, there are still low stack shoes. They do exist. You have to look a little bit harder to find them, but they're not going to get rid of them entirely. With that said, if things do flip around, eventually you're going to be like, that's a lot of sauce. I don't need that much foam. And I feel like a lot of people are starting to realize that once you go beyond 40, regardless of whatever World Athletics says. Yeah. It starts to just become a lot of foam to manage, especially if it's a really soft, compliable P-Bax type foam. I think it will swing back. I think it'll probably come back in the 30s, as far as the shoes in the next 2 years. It'll be interesting to see because now they're able to create these midsoles at much lighter weights, which was also something that they weren't able to do before. So now you can have a 40 millimeter stack height shoe in the heel and have it weigh 7 ounces. That wasn't something you could do before. So I think it will come back. I think that will be a little high for a lot of people and the compliance of these foams, and they'll find a happy medium. But something will come to shake up the shoe world. It always does. Give it every few years, something will come,
I think something, maybe something that we've seen already kind of go through this that's not running shoes. But I remember thinking about cell phones, and it was always like, let's make the cell phone smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller till it's like a watch, right? Which it is now. But now the phones got smaller, and then you're seeing a recurve back up to bigger because there's something about optimizing size for phones that isn't necessarily just as small as you can get it. Even though for a while it was kind of thought, hey, the smaller the better, then it's less obtrusive. But now the function of it's changing. So I think you're probably right there where we're going to find that optimal amount. And optimal is always a strange word because, again, what's good for one person is going to be different. But I think you're right that there's always going to be shoes within that 30 millimeter stack, or at least higher stacks that will
lower.
Always be there.
I mean, even 20, even 15. Like having
that's still higher than it used to be.
Yeah. Like those will still exist. They always have, and they always will.
The other thing that isn't on our list that we probably should have on the list for trends is weight, because all you see is people trying to make shoes lighter. Here's one of my hot takes right now is I think with foams, with stack height, with weight, what we're trying to do is create something that makes running as easy as possible. It's like, how can we create this formula to make something that's hard not hard, which I think for performance makes sense. I think for training and regular mileage, it just doesn't make sense. This should be hard. Like running should be difficult and it should tax our bodies, which is why, hot take, I do think that there's a really big place for minimalist running, because we do know there are actual benefits if you do it smart. The problem is people don't have the patience, and probably including myself, the patience to do it right. But it's like strength training. You got like put in the time for strength training, put in the time for some minimalist running, potentially being a very good option for people.
That was the whole thing with the Nike Free. Initially, that shoe was meant like as a walking shoe, like a little bit of run, some strides, things like that. It was really not meant to be, I'm going to train full time 80 to 100 miles a week, and yet people took it for that. But that's not what it was designed for, because You know, we don't live in that same environment anymore. And if people want to transition into that stuff, you got to recognize your body's not there, and it takes time. There's some evidence on transition period is taking like 6 to 8 months to truly transition into like doing full-time minimalist or barefoot running. So take your time.
And I'm not necessarily an advocate for full-time minimalist, but
Right.
I do think use
If
of
you're
them
interested.
could be good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could
Just
be a good thing.
Small doses for a lot of people. Unless you're an expert and you're already used to that. Anyway.
Adaptations take time.
Yep.
They do. Do you think we'll see the weight trend continue? Will it always be trying to make lighter shoes? No.
I think it's going to vary a little bit. Where to a certain point, when you get super light, the durability is going to go to trash, right? And then you're going to go to the opposite.
Well,
can we make this last longer? And then it's going to come. David, what do you think?
Yeah, durability and protection, right?
Yeah.
So I was having this conversation with someone the other day, and it wasn't that long ago that something like the Nike Streak LT or even the Nike Streak, like that was the top marathon shoe. And then Adidas shook up the world and they created the Adios Boost. And I mean, that shoe by today's standards, the stack height is so low. I mean, we're talking like maybe 20 low, like 22, 23 maybe. And it had basically the same, for lack of a better comparison at the moment, let me find, where did I put, oh my goodness, where did I put it? Here it is. It was underneath me. The Adidas RC3. It was very much like this build, except it had boost and it had a torsion system. That was it. And that was a shoe that someone went and ran 203 in to go break a world record and innovate further. There we go. Yes. And it's going to keep happening, right? Like people are going to keep innovating. They're going to keep changing, and that circle is going to keep it's going to keep going. But at a certain point, you're going to cut weight, and then you're going to be like, wait, we need a little bit more on this. And that's where we're currently at. Is where they're like, okay, wait, we can put this foam in this shoe. We can save some weight that way. It will still add some weight to the shoe, but it won't be that much. So you're going to take a racing flat that was 5 ounces, and now you're going to make it 6 ounces. But it's going to have 35 to 40 millimeters of stack in the heel, and it's going to have 25 to 30 millimeters of stack in the forefoot. And you can increase the volume of the shoe without sacrificing the weight too much, and people can still run fast in that shoe. And then it's
I guess we've seen that, right?
Yeah.
Alpha Fly. We've seen
And
the Alpha Fly.
Yeah.
That's a perfect example there. And then, unless you already said that, and I like zoned out, but I think that sits there. I also think that the Boston 10 gained weight as a trainer. The New Balance 1080 V12 gained weight compared to the previous. So there's kind of this recognition where, like, when does weight matter? What types of shoes and how much of a change in weight makes an impact on running experience? And I feel like that's the other question, and that's probably person dependent. So,
and there is some evidence on this when it comes to performance, which is not every run. Performance wise, I think it's 100 grams you take off the shoe, there's a 1% improvement in running economy, which means efficiency, not necessarily speed. But there's a ceiling effect for that, where all of a sudden, if you take too much off and the cushioning levels out, all of a sudden you'll see a decrease because now you're having to shock absorb. So it's a balance with everything and trying to find that optimum amount. Like Nathan David said, it really depends on what the purpose of the shoe is. For a performance shoe, for a racing shoe, that makes sense. For a trainer, I don't think that. Nah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Cool. All right, trend number 4. This is drop. So I'm going to let one of you guys answer this question, and then we're going to move on to the last one because it's plates. And so you want to talk about it, Matt?
Yeah.
So Matt gets
brief.
this one. My question is, are you seeing a trend in drop? And is that good, bad? Is there one? Go ahead.
I think the trend is everything seems to be slowly going to a more medium level drop. So I think the minimalist movement made a really big impact, where the traditional heel drop being the difference in height between the heel and the front of the shoe and the forefoot, it used to be 10 to 12 millimeter drop in everything, racing shoes, trainers, everything. Minimalist stuff came around. Everything started coming lower. You had these 0 and 4 millimeter drop shoes that came out. And while the minimalist movement has kind of weaned a little bit, now we went to maximalist. What they figured out with the higher stack shoes is that a lot of times if you have a high heel drop with a higher stack shoe, it can make it a little bit wobbly. So they kept that lower drop in a lot of these maximalist shoes. So you've seen a lot of trainers, a lot of racing shoes, they're all hovering in that like 6 to 8 millimeter drop, if not 4 millimeter drop area. And you're really not seeing as many shoes that have 10 millimeter drop, and definitely finding one that has 12 is very rare. So Mizuno and Brooks are two of the companies off the top of my head that still make 12 millimeter drop shoes. And the purpose, it's not necessarily good or bad. It just means that certain people are going to do well, certain people are going to have a little trouble. People that have really short Achilles or short calf muscles, you might want a higher drop shoe, because that's going to offload that. People that are maybe don't have enough strength there, and you want to shift work away from the ankle and go up towards the knee and the hip, a higher drop shoe is going to do better. Whereas a lot of these lower drop shoes are going to require more mobility from the foot and ankle, and they're going to require more calf strength, which does get offset by some of the geometric stuff that we talked about. But it's not necessarily good or bad. It's just a significant change we're seeing, where things are not the same as where they were. I think we're seeing more variety, which is nice, but it's definitely changing. And where it goes from here, no idea.
Yeah, we'll see. Maybe we'll just go no drop, like negative drop. I was going to try to make a joke and it failed. So I'm going to move on to topic 5. The final trend, plates. So this isn't just carbon plates. We're going to talk about all kinds of plates. What trends are we seeing in the plate world? And are plates here to stay? And are plates all smoke, or is there something to them? So David, why don't you kick us off on this one?
I mean, it's a tough one. I mean, plates, I think they are here to stay. They've been here to stay. I mean, they've been around for the last 20 years. Just no one talked about them. So I think using them, that will forever be here. But the mechanisms by which they work and the utility that you can get from them vary vastly. You know, I think so much of it's dependent on the foam integration, the geometry, and how it integrates with the rest of the shoe. It's just one piece of the puzzle, you know?
And how flexible the plate is.
Right, and how flexible the plate is. I mean, if you're talking carbon fiber plate, P-Bax plate, just regular plastic plate, you know, anything like that. I mean, we tried a shoe, what was it, like a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, the 361 Pacer ST. Very flexible. It was plated, but it was very flexible.
Razor
Elite. Yeah, it's basically the same stiffness as the Razor. I hate to say it, but it's very, very similar to the regular Razor. It does lose some weight with the upper, which could give it some better appeal in that regard, but the plates only do as much as the rest of the concoction, shall we say.
Yes.
You know,
like that's really important.
Yeah, I think it's almost like, if I'm going to make an analogy completely outside of the shoe world, let's say you go to a nice restaurant, you sit down, you're on a date night, your anniversary, whatever, and you order a cocktail. And the cocktail comes back, and you can tell the proportions are just not right, whether it's too strong, too soft, from the alcoholic standpoint, or the other components. Like maybe like some flavor is too strong or overbearing. You're like, this isn't working for me. I don't like this. Or maybe it's perfect for you and it works. And that could work for you and you're very happy with it. But the table next to you ordered the exact same thing and they don't like it. Mm-hmm. That could very realistically happen in the shoe world. Mm-hmm. And so not one shoe is going to work for everybody, and it's definitely the ingredients that go into all of this and the ratios and everything else.
Or
I
like
love just like, yeah, or like a pizza with toppings, you know. I also just love talking while Matt keeps
like
going
pineapple.
like this. So
Matt's
I'm just going to keep this going. Like,
I think the pizza works great though too, just to keep this rolling, because you know, something could be a pizza, but if it's got, you know, it's a cheese pizza, right? But it only has like 3 pieces of cheese on the entire thing. Like that doesn't do anything to the pizza. But if you have like appropriate proportions, and everyone has different preferences, and everyone should have pineapple on their pizza. Everybody. No. Always pineapple. Just kidding.
I think it
We
depends.
should wrap this podcast up.
Yeah.
Matt,
So,
what would you like to say?
The research on plates right now has been, at most, they seem to contribute a 1% economy change. And that's at most. And that's with way older stuff. That's like 16 years ago now. Some of the newer evidence suggests that when it comes to one of the things that plates do is they add stiffness. That's something we definitely know. And certain people do really well with stiff shoes and certain people don't. So the optimal stiffness is going to be person dependent for finding an optimal shoe for them. So that's why somebody might enjoy the Endorphin Speed from Saucony has a nylon plate, and somebody else might enjoy the Endorphin Pro more with the carbon fiber plate. So it's gonna vary, but the big thing we're seeing right now is the geometry and shape of the plate. We still don't know a lot about that. We're seeing little bits of going, hey, we're seeing these more spoon-shaped plates, and people are learning, going, if you shape them like this, there might be this change. We don't know enough about this yet, but I really, as you both said, would mention that it's part of the whole concoction that makes the shoe. I think Nike... Everybody got excited with the Nike Vaporfly, and we're talking about the carbon plate, what have you. But I think it again, some of the early research that was done demonstrated that the foam was actually the material that contributed the largest amount of economy change. But it wasn't the only thing. It's all the pieces together. And then I got to give a shout out to Laura Healy. I got to give a shout out for her because she and Hooter over the university, they're testing some of the Puma stuff. Found out that when they cut a Vaporfly plate in half, the shoe economy was exactly the same. So that starts to ask, and again, there needs to be more evidence, but that starts to ask the question, what is the plate doing? Is it facilitating forward motion? Is it stabilizing the softer foams? What's the purpose? And what we do know is the shoes that just have a carbon fiber plate and don't have these foams or these other components, they are not performing on the same level in terms of economy, right? So we talk about, not to poo-poo on the shoe, but the Rocket X and stuff like that. It's a great shoe. It's a really fun shoe, but it's not going to have the same economy improvement as something like the Vaporfly or the Metaspeed Sky. And it's because it's just one piece, and you got to think the overall part. But that formula might work really well for somebody. So I don't want to poo-poo on it.
Right.
The other thing that's been shown too has been in terms of plate placement. They have been showing that if there's certain parts where it's closer to the foot, it's going to have a higher impact than if it's something that is far away from the foot, where that really won't do a whole lot from an economy perspective. David, you had something though.
Just going off of the whole concoction idea. I mean, a lot of people have. Again, this is another part of the world where theory meets practice, right? And research tends to be a little bit behind. And people are practicing with...
A lot behind.
Yeah, very behind. I mean, research is almost 10 years behind most of the time. So by the time you can actually get things quantifiable and, without a doubt and answer these things within reasonable coefficients, it's usually pretty behind. But anyways, side tangent. Looking at the concoction of the shoe and looking at what plates are doing, and a lot of people are willing to argue that the plate actually helps maintain the structure and geometry of the shoe and helps maintain the ride more so than an actual performance benefit. It's more preventing deformation of the midsole itself and allowing you to follow the pathway that is intended. And again, this is something that's more subjective, that is talked about. It's not something that has been fully researched just yet outside of secondary variables such as cutting the plate or placement of the plate or things like that. But they have a purpose. They're there. They seem to work. And that's about all we know at the moment. And in conjunction with other variables concurrently.
But not by themselves.
I think the other... Right. I think the other trend that we're seeing outside of using plates within performance shoes is plates are being put in every shoe now. All training, a lot of training shoes are getting plates. My take on this is that that's pretty much useless unless it gives you a platform that allows you to run comfortably. I could see where a nicely rockered stiff shoe with a plate can be good for someone with hallux rigidus or some kind of fusion within their first ray. But a couple examples. You look at the Skechers Razor XS2, and this is another trend, 4-foot plates. So there's shoes that are getting 4-foot plates. This is one of them, the XS2. it doesn't really change the stiffness factor too much between this shoe and the original Razor XS. And so I think that, again, when we talk about marketing, they may have studied this and shown some stuff, but from a running experience perspective and what it's actually doing from an running economy perspective, it's not there. Plates don't equal performance when you put them in a training shoe. Bondi X, I think David made a good point about how it can maintain kind of the form of the shoe maybe a little bit better and like stop some deformation of foams, but that's not, the Bondi X doesn't probably improve your running performance for your marathon. Another training shoe with plates and stiffening agents is the Boston 10. Again, I love this shoe and I love how it works. The rods aren't something that's necessarily needed from a performance standpoint. They're just there to change how the shoe feels. Tecton X, another one with a full plate that doesn't have super foams. This one you go into a little bit more racing, so you can kind of see the 2 plates. Yes, sorry, this one has 2 plates, which is another thing that we won't dive into now. But you're seeing plates everywhere. Another 4-foot plate is in the Float Ride X from Reebok. So you just have all these shoes getting plates. All these plates have varying stiffnesses. The Razor XS2, not very stiff. The Float Ride X, very stiff. And so plate doesn't equal the same thing. You got to figure out what it is. And I would say most of the time they're kind of useless from a running economy perspective. If you're trying to get better running economy, don't go get a trainer with a plate thinking it's going to make you run more efficiently or faster. That's my soapbox.
I think I agree. When it comes to training, right? If somebody needs that stiffness, and certain people might, that's fine. But I think the majority of people, I think having a decently flexible training shoe is probably going to be fine if they have the right motion. But there's always going to be exceptions. Do you need a plate in every training shoe? No.
Yeah. So let's move on to our final thing, and it's looking at future trends that maybe aren't mainstream now, but are there any trends that you might see coming in the running shoe industry, or trends you'd like to see?
I think the biggest one that you both referenced earlier is probably shoes with pineapples on them.
Yeah. Pizza.
Yeah, and shoes.
And shoes.
David, tell us something that's meaningful.
Brooks might put pineapples on their shoes. They do fun designs. Brooks might do that for us.
I thought if somebody has done that, I think somebody actually put not the like an actual pineapple, but like one of the images on the upper graphically. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, cool. David, what do you think?
I think the future of performance is individually tuning these shoes. I think finding what works for the individual from biomechanical data and moving in that direction. With that said, that's probably going to be more in the professional realm because they have the resources and labs to actually do that and tune the shoes. Another thing that I think is really interesting that I've been noticing that is I would still consider it future, even though it's present, because it's something new that I've been noticing. Specifically at the 5K, 10K distance, they're not as rockered and they're more flexible.
Yeah.
Have you guys noticed that? So whether or not you're looking at the
SC Pacer is an example for sure.
Yeah, so let's take a look at the New Balance Pacer. Let's look at the Adidas Takumi Sen. Let's look at the Nike Streak Fly. They're a little bit more flexible. They're not all carbon plated. I don't know about the Pacer. Is the Pacer carbon plated?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. How's the flexibility?
Pacer.
Is it compared to like the RC?
It still bends. I have
that definitely bends.
I'm sending this to you though, so that you can run in it.
Okay. I mean, just based on looking at it, that thing bent like it actually has some flexibility. And I've been noticing that, like, even anecdotally, like the Puma Deviate Nitro Elite has a little bit more of a flexible plate than some of the other super shoes. And that works for me at faster paces than a lot of the other shoes on the market. And it's not necessarily designed for 5K, but I'm noticing having a little bit more flexibility up front and a little less sharp of a rocker actually works because you can actually get up onto that forefoot and load that plate a little bit more. And the race is so short. Like, I mean, it's not like your intervals are that long. Like, you can last out a certain amount. And I think it's just really interesting to see that shift, right? Like, looking at the Takumi Sen, it's a glass fiber rod. It's not a carbon fiber rod. Looking at the Nike Dragonfly, it's a Pebax plate. It's not a carbon plate. Looking at different shoes that are designed for 5K and 10K, they're actually creating a little bit of flexibility, and they're not creating as sharp of a rocker design because I think they want you to load that forefoot and midfoot a little bit more and really explode off of it. Because like I said, I mean, for the elites, I mean, this race is done in 12 minutes. It's like 12, 13 minutes, you know, and if you're 10K, we're talking, I mean, they just broke 27. 4 guys went under 27 in that Adidas event just yesterday. Like on a road, not even on track, in the Takumi Sen, 4 guys broke 27 on the road in the 10K. So I think it's interesting to take a look at these geometries and the flexibility, and I don't know if they have a coefficient specifically for how stiff these shoes are at the forefoot, but creating a little bit more flexibility and letting you do you at the shorter distances, and then at the longer distances looking at how can we maximize economy because it is a sub-maximal intensity.
Yes.
Granted, by the end it's a race, but you are not running all out for 20. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to feel good for 18 of those miles if you do it correctly, probably. Right. And then gut it out. So, yeah.
That's an interesting one. I hadn't thought of that. I think that's a really good point. I think one that Matt Trudeau mentioned last week is customizing shoes even within the trainer realm, like finding ways to maximize people's preferred movement pathway and customizing shoes to people, like custom ordered shoes. And so I think that could be something that comes. The other one that we've had conversations with a couple companies who have talked about this, and there's other, small startups. You see them trying to push this idea of shoes tuned to your pace of running. So if you want to run efficiently at 8-minute mile, 9-minute mile, 10-minute mile, trying to design shoes for that. And that we'll see what comes there. But that's definitely been a conversation from a couple companies that we've been able to speak with, which we'll see if that comes, which would be interesting from like a race perspective. Yep. I would love if I knew what shoe would be great for a 330 guy or like a 315 guy. If I'm like, that'd be awesome. Well, that'd be cool.
Interestingly enough, I know the company some of the companies you're talking about in Japan, that's how they categorize their shoes, is by your marathon finish time. They have a section for 4 to 5 hours. They have a 3:30 section. They have sub 3 hour, which is kind of this very, very big deal to get to. I'm that geek that's going through trying to translate some of these pages and see what's out there in different markets. Because fun fact, not everything is available worldwide. There's certain markets that do really well with that stuff, and those who have followed know what a geek I am, and I cause problems with that. But yeah, I wonder if we'll move in that way, or if that's maybe not something that consumers in the United States might focus on. It's interesting to think about, because again, it comes down to when you focus on one variable, what are the other things that you need to pay attention to in this whole equation? As we mentioned, you got to be a little cautious with that, because this is not a single variable thing. And we've seen this repeatedly where the people focus heavily on one variable, and that usually becomes a trend, and then it moves on. Watch this become a really big deal after I said that, and I'll eat my foot. Yeah. For a shoe. I will eat a shoe.
I just love, for the record, from the depths of the internet, Matt has gone and searched and found these catalogs in different languages and has sent these to us.
It's hilarious.
And you're trying to transcribe what is going on the papers, and you're like, you can see the shoe and you have an idea, but you can't actually, you don't know what you're reading.
Right, you have no idea.
It's so funny.
It'll have some small bit in English, and then we'll talk to the people from these companies, and they're like, oh, and then I'll ask, what about this shoe? And they're like, how do you know about that? And they're like, he found a catalog in we don't know what language, but he found it.
In Swahili, I don't know.
We don't know what it says, but we know it's a shoe.
I'm sure we've missed other trends, so we're going to wrap things up here, but if you have any thoughts and things we haven't touched on that you'd love to hear kind of our take on those different trends that we didn't hit today, you can drop a comment below. As always, these are posted on YouTube as well, so you can comment most easily on YouTube. And if you are elsewhere, you can email us at doctorsofrunningpodcast@gmail.com, and we'd be able to compile a list of things. So what other trends are you guys seeing? Feel free to, Matt really wants to say another thing. He's got the finger up.
Yeah.
The finger.
Really
what you got, Matt?
least I'm raising my hand.
Yeah.
The other really big one that I think has been slowly happening, but really hasn't gotten the notice, is designing women-specific shoes. So Puma has one coming out that we're really, really excited with. And I have to give a shout out to some of my students at APU who just did a systematic review on this and found that there is like no research on this topic. Outside of the fact that we know women have different feet and different biomechanics. And for the longest time, many people in the industry have been doing what's called shrink it and pink it, meaning they take the men's shape last and they make it smaller and put what they perceive to be women's colors on it and then sell it. So this is changing. I think this is another area that I think a really big trend when it comes to customization is recognizing the differences between different, whether it's groups, whether it's different people, and not like segregating people, but acknowledging those and asking how can we optimize everyone's performance.
And I feel like in those, some are going to stick, and then some will be like, nope, this doesn't matter. So move on, and we'll find out.
Yep.
Oh, we got more. Go ahead, DJ.
He raised his hand.
We're never going to end it. That's okay.
That's my fault.
I'll make it quick. I'll make it really quick. We're probably going to make this an entirely different episode in and of its own right, but redefining stability and what that means.
Oh, yeah.
And,
I was going to
taking
that.
We'll do that.
Yeah, and taking shoe configuration, how you can do it, and what you can do with a piece of footwear and foams, and how you can guide the linear pathway that is running.
Yeah.
That in itself is a wild west that a lot of people are experimenting with at the moment. So
That's a
Yeah.
6-hour episode.
This is kind of the start of a series that'll happen throughout the year where we're talking about current concepts in footwear. Today we're talking about midsoles. We're going to be talking about uppers at some point. We'll be talking about stability at some point. We're going to talk about current trends in footwear when it comes to running, about different topics. So if you have ideas for that too, so just going back, if you want to talk about any other trends that you've seen in the running industry that you want to hear our thoughts on, or that you want to share thoughts with us about, email us at doctorsofrunningpodcast@gmail.com, or you can comment on YouTube, as well as other future trends that you might think come, or things the questions you think that these developers should be asking. We do get to talk to a lot of them, so if you have ideas, we can always pass things along, which is a fun thing as well. But thank you all for sticking with us today. This was a fun episode, and we could have kept going, but we are almost at an hour and a half, so it's good to cut things off. If you want to follow what we're doing, check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. I also feel weird doing this. No, I'm not gonna do it because I feel too weird, so I'm not gonna do it. You'll never know. Everyone's gonna have to be curious what they are. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, check those things out. We keep everything updated, as well as obviously on our website, doctorsofrunning.com, and we will catch you all next time.